Hey folks, really appreciate you joining in on tonight's call, for being active and involved Democrats and realizing how important delivering on our values, delivering on our platform ties to electing great Democrats to serve in public office. And in particular, recognizing the true contribution that candidates and office holders make to our party in not just their campaigns, where they talk about the issues that we want to make sure we're moving forward on in Oregon, but also delivering on the real important goals we have as a party. Now, I'm again Brad Martin. I'm the executive director for the Democratic Party of Oregon, and the local election project has had a really strong and powerful history since it was first formed. And as Ron pointed out, training hundreds and hundreds of activists and candidates and helping give our team the tools to be effective in the campaigns that they run. Now, I want to hit on a couple of kind of big points just to start off, but want to recognize that, you know, when you're doing this work, you have to be strategic in your thinking and look at some real basics to get started. One is the targeted offices that will be on your ballot this May, and Ron can help you figure that out if you don't have it on your screen, but you know, so can your local elections office help you figure it out. Know the job descriptions for those positions and the history and benefits. Now that's just a really basic starting point that may seem obvious, but kind of knocking down the obvious early on in the first 50 days, which is what we have now before the filing deadline, allows you to think about what kinds of folks you're going to recruit for what kinds of folks, what kind of positions are available on the May ballot. So targeted offices, you know, I think probably the most important thing you realize is that you be strategic in the work you're going to do, both in the next 50 days and in the total in the 111 days that we have before the May election. You want to be strategic in your targets, your plans, and your campaigns. You're much better to have a sense of the positions that are open for the May election and figure out those races where you think either because of political background or history or because of an opportunity, maybe a Republican in office who is not doing well and it's acknowledged that they're not doing well, or just plain a great candidate who you believe will work really hard, that you're better to do a few races well and strategically than trying to simply make this a process of filing someone for every office and being stretched too thin. Now, there's some old hands who are well experienced in running candidate recruitment and local election campaigns, and they may have more ambitious, wider reaching goals for the number of races they want to target. But I want to acknowledge that we tend to use this training and the odd numbered year local election project as a way for many new chairs and new campaign chairs in county parties to kind of get their sea legs, to get some experience, to help elect good Democrats to important offices, recognizing that we have local elections, obviously, again in the even year in May of 2020. So be thoughtful and strategic in your goals in terms of the races you're going to work on and your plans for accomplishing them. And I think you'll learn throughout the training that while we're talking about recruiting candidates, we're clearly also talking about backing candidates. That part of the way to get the best folks you want to have run is to be able to make supportive offers to them on how you're going to help them in their election. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So kind of some early basics to have on your screen when you're building your candidate recruitment strategy. One is you want to build a candidate recruitment team. And small and smart, you know, 3 to 5 people who've got some diversity, who've got some experience, is much better than large and clunky. In other words, better to have 3 to 5 people running this effort who are really good at bringing in peers and consulting wider groups than to try and make this an exercise of scheduling 15 or 20 people. The process will overrun your goals. Now, I do want to be clear, when you're building a recruitment team, it really should have some variety in it. It does not just have to be county party Democrats. They should obviously all be Democrats, but an activist from a local community group who may also want to work on campaigns, a former legislator or office holder, she or he might be a great addition to the team. Someone who is just that, well-connected person in the community that knows everybody. Those are all good examples of who you might want to have on your recruitment team. But you've got 50 days. Don't spend the next 40 building your team. Figure out some people you can work with. You can always add a person or two when it becomes clear, but you want to get rolling. Secondly, you want to make a simple plan. The deadline is March 21st. That is 50 days. I like to, when I do this kind of a plan, just have basically, a column for, a column for every week, and figure out what you're going to do in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, right up to that filing deadline. And the plan doesn't have to be terribly complicated. It can be going over the 10 points we're going to review here in a minute and figuring out when you're going to get each one of those 10 points done. So probably best example would be if you've got 7 weeks. This is week 1, and it might be just getting your team together, getting the job descriptions, and getting the maps. That's the first week of your plan. Week 2 might be your first meeting, brainstorming ideas of candidates, etc. The third thing I really, really want to encourage you to do is, obviously been involved with candidate recruitment for a number of cycles, and it is amazing how many times your best, most wonderful, brilliant idea that no one thought of until the last minute candidate says no. And they say no because you're asking late. They say no because their kid is about to graduate from high school. But that person who said no last cycle might very well say yes next cycle. And so it's really worth creating a notebook that all your brainstorming goes into, some very simple notes. This isn't minutes. This isn't about keeping track of process. It's about all those good ideas you have as possible candidates, what the outcome was on if you approach them or not. So a year from now, when we have the next round of local elections, or 2 years from now, it happens every year, you've got a starting place to build on, and that is such a gift. Even if you move on to other endeavors and other kinds of projects in your county party, that is such a gift to give to the next county chair or next campaign chair for your county party. So I really want to make it simple. It can just be a 3-rim binder with some pages put in and some kind of bright sticker on it, so you know that's what it is and you just take care of it. So you should be getting this handout, but there's a very kind of straightforward approach I've used in trainings to talk about how people do candidate recruitment. It's the top 10 steps, but I want to say most clearly that what we're trying to say here is candidate recruitment, recruiting a great candidate, makes all the difference on whether or not you win. And so doing it with serious thought and serious effort means you're more likely to be successful in recruiting candidates that will run hard, work hard, campaign hard, win, and then be great office holders. So the thoughtfulness by which you do it, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be, but the thoughtfulness by which you do it just increases your chances of doing it in a way that will be successful. And, I'll talk about it a little bit when you do your pitches to candidates, but the difference between calling up somebody and just saying, hey, we've got this position open on the school board, want to run? And getting kind of a, well, why are you asking me? I don't know anything about this thing. The difference between that kind of approach and a sit-down meeting where you go through what you know about the race, how you're going to help them as a candidate, why you're asking them to run, the reasons why you think they should think about and make a decision that will impact their life and their community, that there's a world of difference in the responses. And so just doing this with some thoughtfulness and some purposefulness can really impact the quality of your efforts. So just to kind of do the 90,000 foot version, and then we're going to go through each slide. The top 10 steps are forming a committee, like we just discussed, political team with allies, get a district map, and review the local election spreadsheets or any spreadsheets about past elections. So that means election results maybe from 2 years ago or 4 years ago, depending on the term of office. Pick a secretary, and then profile and target the districts. And a secretary is just someone to kind of put down all the things, all those great ideas you come up with in that notebook. And that doesn't mean you have to go recruit someone to take minutes. It means just someone who will actually keep that legacy binder for future. And profiling targeting the districts is often just about looking at the map and thinking about what businesses are in the district, what the character of different parts of the community are in a political district, and if there's any districts that are really important for you to target for either turnout, making sure progressives and Democrats turn out to vote, or for persuasion, where you really want to run one-to-one contact programs to make sure you can increase the likelihood they back your candidate. And again, we're going to go in these a little more depth as we go through. Brainstorming names is coming up with a diverse group and variety of folks that you might approach to recruit. Figure out the best approach, what's most likely to get a successful answer. Item 6 is prioritize your asks. You don't want to ask them all at once, but figure out your 2 or 3 people you want to ask first and set a deadline for asking and for their answer. Meeting with prospects. You want to be organized, lay out the reasons in your assets, closing the deal. Eventually, they have to say yes or no, and you don't want to be shy about actually closing the decision. Point 9 is a heartbreaker, and the reason why it's on here is you get a yes and they're ready to file and they forget to file a form. It's not something you want to do, so you just want to very carefully pay attention to making sure they file their paperwork and help your candidates with supports, funds, and building a team. Now, I'm going to go into each one of these a little deeper, but seriously, I want to make clear that repeating these steps and just kind of doing them in an organized fashion, don't make them too complicated, is how you can recruit great candidates for great races. So, form a committee. Now, I've already talked about this. Small, smart, and diverse. You certainly want a couple people from your central committee. You certainly want to have 1 or 2 people who are either active maybe in a local union that really works hard or an allied organization. Now, sometimes people who are on C3s or C4 community groups that are activists within communities of color or activists within issue organizations, they may not be able to join you as a member of that group, but they can join you as a private citizen and lend their great insights and advocacy, particularly if they're in a C3. That's just something to be aware of. Don't hesitate to ask them, because if they can help you figure out great people to run and recruit, you'll want them on your team. And former office holders can be great, but you see my tip here. The best office holders are people who've actually run tough campaigns and won. It's sometimes very hard to take a candidate in a solidly Democratic district that, no matter what they did, they were going to win, and have them involved in candidate pitches for folks who are going to run in much tougher districts. So people who really appreciate the importance of thorough, well-run campaigns. And connected means what it sounds like. Folks who just know people in the community, have some connections. So it's not just about having a smart opinion about politics. It's about actually someone who knows, this person was, ran one of the church groups and they did all those great community projects and they've been talking about how frustrated the way the local school board runs. People who just know people. Get a district map and review it. This is very straightforward, and that is you want to know the geography of that which people have to live in and run from, and the communities that you're going to use to win, and that you're going to work and do outreach in to win, and then know how to describe the opportunity district numbers simply in a path to victory. And what do we mean by that? Well, this is an off-cycle election, so even in a district that a Republican might have won by a couple hundred votes or even 1,000 votes, in a year where a Democrat wasn't running, or maybe where a Democrat didn't run a good campaign, there might be a number of districts where there's a high Democratic registration that no one really made an effort to turn out. And so when you're figuring out your game plan, you want to look at those kinds of numbers to figure out, what are the opportunities to elect Democrats. And, there's an old history in particularly tough districts. Off-cycle years is when we can win them, because if we do a better job and get out the vote than they do it and get out the vote, oftentimes we can pick up districts that might not otherwise be available to us. Pick a secretary, profile the districts, hold a first meeting. Secretary is, again, just someone who records the information and ideas, potential candidates for the legacy notebook. And talking about the district is to go through each district and profile its numbers, like I said, the election results, the geography, political history, what people know about races, current and past office holders, major institutions located in the district, and then maybe rough out some ideas of what a good candidate is, but don't overly limit yourself. Someone who is inspired and maybe a community leader may not perfectly match the district, but someone who's going to run a good campaign, really do a lot of grassroots outreach, someone who's going to work hard to talk one-to-one to voters will often do better than someone who may, be great and recognized as a wonderful person in the community, but really just doesn't understand, how important it is in campaigns to talk to people one-on-one. Now, again, you only have so many days to get this done, so I'm not saying if you're working on 3 districts, you're not spending an hour on each district. This is just kind of a quick run through, 15 minutes on each, so your team knows exactly what it is they're trying to accomplish in recruiting the candidate. Brainstorming ideas. Now, some people on this call may know what a strict brainstorm is, but brainstorming works when it doesn't become a debate every time a new idea or name is put forward. Brainstorming works in this kind of a setting where literally everybody puts up the people that they're thinking of, and they're all good. You don't tear them apart. You're going to have a chance to talk about pros for each one of them and think about any weaknesses, but it's going to be much more freeform if people believe they can really put any idea up, no matter how kind of out there it is, and then put up another idea. So the best brainstorms are done when you put a lot of names up, and when you're done with every single name that everyone come up with, you go back through the list. So you got all those names up, and advocates talk about why they think someone is great, and they can also talk about weaknesses. Kind of after you've had that conversation as a group, you should talk out the next step, which is how you might approach each of those prospects and what are your priority prospects. Now, what that means is figuring out, well, who knows this candidate that, there's 3 people and we think all 3 of them would be great. Who knows the first one? What are they going to be worried about running as a candidate? Who can answer those questions? Who's the best person to come to a meeting with them, talk to them about running as soon as possible, and encouraging them to think of themselves in this new role. And after you figure that out, prioritize your asks. Now, my suggestion is, usually the best way to do this is you'll have 3 or 4 candidates, you'll have some disagreements, figure out who can do the best ask, figure out what the best ask is, and after you've got that done, prioritize them. And you can do 2 or 3 at the same time. If you do that, you want to make sure the candidates you're approaching know that. They don't have to know the names of the other people, but you can definitely do 2 or 3 at a time. But you should figure out what your, first kind of / second and maybe third choice is. Assign each ask. Be smart and be sure to review the ask and role play the ask. In other words, practice how you're going to ask this person to run for office, and then set a deadline for each one of those asks. So we're already at asking people to run for office. We're on point number 6, and this is a classic case of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Do a good job of thinking about the districts, thinking about the right kinds of candidates, thinking about how you can broaden your view of who you're going to ask to run and how you're going to ask them. But really what you want to get to quick is a prioritized list of 1, 2, 3 candidates, and go start the process of seeing if they're thinking about it. My experience is the more time you can actually approach them and tell them we know this is a serious decision, the more time they have to work with you on an answer, the more likely they'll take your ask seriously and more likely to say yes. Someone you ask on the very last day of filing is probably going to take it the way it sounds, which is, wow, how important could this be? You waited till the last minute. People you ask 10 days from now, 15 days from now, 20 days from now have a little more time to ask you questions, think about it, and realize that you're making a serious effort to recruit them. Slide 7, meet with the prospects, individually or in small groups with friends. And again, it shouldn't be a team of 20. It should be a smaller group or a one-on-one meeting. And I usually don't like these to be more than 2 to 3 people on at the largest level. You want to have an organized agenda where you review the office, the duties, the importance of the position, and the benefits. In other words, both what are you going to do in here, but also if there's any pay, what the pay is, if there's any other kind of positive values. Maybe this is somebody who's young and wants to run up, for another office. They're very interested in school. They should think about running for school board. Maybe if they ever want to run for the legislature. Tell them why you're approaching them, the strengths that you've identified, and why you're asking them. Talk to them about a path for victory. Now, they're going to be, obviously, the candidate. They have to have a plan. But you want to actually tell them a little bit about how you think that they could win, that because of their strengths, these are things that will be attractive. Because your county party maybe has a well-organized neighborhood leader program, here's how you're going to do one-to-one outreach and help them do door-to-door outreach, that we've got a voter file that can help them do voter contacts, that the county party may be willing to give them some seed money to get running, and all those things that are the next point, which is how you're going to back them if they decide to say yes. Certainly a lot of time for them to ask questions, and then bluntly set a deadline for their answer. Now, the deadline could include a second meeting, but absolutely set a deadline for when you'd like to hear. Be very clear to them if you're approaching other candidates. You probably shouldn't be talking about the other names. You can, but you don't have to. But let them know that you're talking to a couple of other people, because this is an important office, and you want to make sure you have someone file for this office so that Democrats can be elected and win. Closing the deal. So you've got a potential candidate in their interest. Determine a path to yes. In other words, what are the questions they really need to be answered? Who else do they need to hear from? And how do you get that information? Now, questions to be answered are, there's some facts they want to know. They want to know, if there's any qualifications. They want to know something about the hours. And, those things can often be answered in that meeting, but you sometimes need to do follow-up. But it might also be important that they hear from other people. In other words, if there's someone who used to hold that office and they're on your committee but they're not in the meeting, then you might want to offer that they talk to them. A pretty common thing that happens is if they're concerned about, what kinds of hours, what kinds of duties, and again, someone who's held the office before can be helpful. But if that office has always been held by a Republican, you probably want to just sketch it out for them as to what they can kind of expect and how they do the job and decide. Hold them to a deadline. If they're yes, get them rolling, make sure they get filed. We'll go to those slides next. If they're maybe, sometimes you just have to move on. A maybe's a wonderful thing. A maybe can be left very friendly. It's like, well, maybe not this cycle, but we might approach you next cycle. And if a no, put them in the legacy notebook, because I have many, many, many stories of people who said no one cycle who were ready to do it the next cycle. So don't count off no's forever. Circumstances that may make someone say no this year may not be the same reason that they might say no next year. And often those can be turned into yeses. They just needed some time to warm up to it. You definitely want to make sure you bird dog all the forms and paperwork. Have a list of everything that needs to do to make sure that they're on the ballot, that they're doing all their campaign finance reporting correctly, and absolutely make sure you go through every single step with the candidate and make sure it happens by the deadlines. That means you don't call them the day of the deadline. You call them 5 days before the deadline and help get the form into whatever office it needs to get to. And it's just one of those things that can get lost on someone who may be new as a candidate. Wonderful teacher, wonderful judge, wonderful preacher, all could be wonderful office holders, but they may not be familiar with the mechanics of political organization, and you want to help them succeed at that piece and make sure you get it done. And then number 10, back your candidate with support, funds, and a team. Book them for a training. We have the training on, we have both the online training, so they can start watching videos right now, and in person, Saturday, March 23rd in Salem. It's good for them to go just to realize that this is a skill they can learn, they can ask questions, and they can also work with other people who may be doing this for the first time as well. You can help them raise seed money. It doesn't take a lot to get them rolling, and Katie's going to talk a little bit about fundraising. You can help them build a team, somebody who volunteers to organize their phone bank or their door canvas. That's a huge asset to someone in a campaign that basically is going to get decided in 111 days. You can talk about ways of promoting their candidacy, that you're going to send an email out to everybody on the county party email list, introducing them and letting them know how they can back the candidate, and you're going to have them speak at a county party meeting. You may have folks who are on different social organizations offering to book them into those organizations so they can speak. And then, obviously, helping them with voter contact and turning out the vote. Those are the ways that you can back the candidate. And these are the kinds of things that, again, things we take for granted as people who are politically active. aren't necessarily on the screens of folks who, again, would be great office holders because they have other wonderful leadership roles in our communities, but they may never have run for office. And you want to be the person helping decode and demystify and make really practical the kinds of ways you can help this person run an election and win. So finally, I really want to emphasize that a key part of successfully recruiting candidates is obviously coming up with a great list, figuring out how you're going to approach it, but really doing a serious, thoughtful, organized ask of someone who you're asking to change their lives. And what I mean by that is there's all sorts of commitments. You know, you're going to be spending hours on important work. You're going to be having to have public meetings. You're going to have to learn new skills. You know, you're suddenly going to become a person who's in the public domain. And that means you might have to learn to deal with press. And so you want to have the seriousness of what you're asking them to be certainly matched by the seriousness of your ask. So again, you want to be able to review the office and duties and the importance of the benefits of doing the position. You want to talk again about their strengths and why you're asking. You know, this isn't just, hey, this is important, there's an evil, horrible person in that office, you could beat them. You want to talk to them about why you're talking to them and why you think they would be good in this role. Certainly the path to victory, how you'll back them, answering questions, and setting deadlines to take next steps. So with that, I hope that gives you kind of a good overview, and you'll be getting this outline. I hope that gives you a good overview of the steps you can take to just run a smart, organized candidate recruitment program. But most importantly, I do want to encourage you to think about having a real range of diverse candidates that we're helping promote, recruit, and involve in this party that reflects the diversity of Oregon and actually builds on that diversity. And Mario will be up next and talking to you. Mario Parker Milligan is our constituency outreach coordinator, and he'll be talking to you about important ways to think about how you build that diversity in your candidate recruitment efforts and campaigns. Thank you.